Hello. Today we are going to be discussing growing up in America as Asian Americans, the lived experiences we've had, as well as just our outlook on what it means to be Asian American and the relationship we have with our country, our culture, etc., etc. So, first and foremost, my background, I'm half white, half Taiwanese, so I'm biracial. I think that gives me a unique perspective in and of itself. But how about you, Catherine?
I am full Korean, so I was born here, and I think I'd be what you consider a second generation immigrant.
Awesome, sweet, cool. So right off the bat, just a little demographic that some people may or may not know is Asian Americans make up roughly 5% of the total American population. So do the math, that's 1 in 20. Um, it's certainly not a large proportion, but it's also not teeny tiny. Um, and of course, like with any demographic, you'll find when you study and stratify within populations, you're going to see characteristics and you're going to see diversity. Um, Asian Americans aren't a monolith, right? Um, but yeah, I mean, if you look at the continent of Asia as a whole, it's a big continent. You've got a lot of culture, you've got a lot of variety, diversity, religion, different types of economies, and of course, I think we're going to see that reflected here in America as well. Um, but that being said, I think it's gonna be this way for any immigrants. I'd say particularly for non-white, non-Caucasian immigrants coming to America, the way that your culture might will be prevalent or significant in your lived lifestyle, despite inhabiting a different country. The way that can manifest is going to vary from person to person. So that being said, what can you say about your own Korean culture, Catherine? Its
I
its
think
prevalence in your life or your parents' influence, et cetera, et cetera. I just take it and run with it.
I have to say, like, when I think of Asian American, the first thing I think a lot of my Korean friends at least think of is like, what, what kind. So, to explain what I mean by that, for instance, like my roommate is what you would call either like a first or a 1.5. So she speaks Korean pretty fluently. She has like a lot of cultural ties, and she still like kind of maintains that relationship to I think Korea in ways that I don't necessarily do. So depending on what I think level of Korean you are, it means different things. So I am pretty solidly second generation, so I'm considered pretty Americanized. But we still do things that are I think fairly Korean. Like
Hmm.
we always I guess have like mandukuk, which is like dumpling soup on New Year's, and we have certain events where we have to get together and we always eat certain foods. So those kind of habits are still there, even if maybe like my language or understanding of them isn't quite the same. So that's what I first think of.
Interesting. Okay, sweet. Thank you for sharing. Um, yeah, so when you say things like that, I think it's very evident that I mean, especially with us among the younger generation, even people younger than ourselves, what I've seen in my life is you have some Asian Americans who, I guess, they're fresh off the boat. They're still very culturally in touch, in tune with their country of origin, their ethnicity. Um, some people might not even have fluent English yet, and there's nothing wrong with that, of course. I mean, we are a country of immigrants. So, so that being said, simultaneously on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have, I guess, whitewashed Asians. I guess I would be a decent example. I mean, I'm half Taiwanese. I can't speak Taiwanese. I can't speak Mandarin. I guess I have an excuse given that I am half white. But I mean, I like Asian food. I like Asian culture. But like I said, I can't tell you much about my Taiwanese heritage. And I think some people would say that's a travesty or that's a bad thing, yada yada yada. Some people might say that, and I think it's fine that they think that, but I disagree. I think more knowledge is better than less knowledge. So yeah, it would be super cool if I was well versed with Taiwanese culture and history stuff. But I guess that's just not the way my life has unfolded. And I mean, it's not the end of the world in my opinion. But what do you think?
I think honestly, like that's what kind of it used to bother me. I think a lot more when people would say like, "Oh, but can't you speak Korean fluently?" And I'd say no. They would kind of say like, "Oh, well, that's such a shame. Like, that's such a loss." And I'm like, "Well, I can still appreciate like Korean
Right,
culture for what it is. It's
right.
still familiar to me. It's just comes to me in a different way than it does for other people, right? So when you say like you appreciate parts of like Asian culture or maybe Taiwanese culture, what kind of comes to mind for you? Like what do you feel like you're pretty comfortable with? Something that's familiar to you?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot. I'm gonna be
Sorry.
honest. No, no, no. This is a good question. It's good that I'm uncomfortable because I mean it's embarrassing, but I don't know jack squat. You know me. I love Japanese culture.
Hmm.
I've lived in Japan. Growing up, the vast majority of my friends were ethnically Japanese. Some of them were more in touch with their Japanese culture than others, but I like anime. I like sushi. Tokyo's my favorite city in the world. I like ramen. And sure, maybe these sound like weeb stuff to say, but it's just true. Like, I studied Japanese in high school. I studied it in college for a bit.
Oh, I did
Um,
not know that. Okay.
yeah, but not. I mean, not that much. I was supposed to study abroad there, but obviously COVID-19 happened,
Mm.
and it got canceled. But that being said, I to me the first thing that comes to mind is the language. I think the language is like the biggest indicator. Like I guess it's romanticized like, oh, I'm bilingual. Like that's a cool skill to have. And um I can't say it, unfortunately. I wish I could, but it's not the end of the world. I think of food as well. I guess that was kind of what you were originally asking. I don't eat that much Taiwanese food.
Well, if anything, that makes you more Asian American than like specifically like half Taiwanese American, right? You can appreciate all these other things. And
Right.
the way that my mom has always explained it to me, which I found to be funny but kind of true, is like she she told me once when I was younger. She was like, if you're like Asian or from another country and you go to another person who is also from another country, even if they're Indian or they're like from Africa, she's like, you don't care because your food smells too. Everyone's food smells. It doesn't matter. And she was like, you have more appreciation for it. It doesn't bother you, which
Mhm.
I think is kind of true.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Oh, I've never really thought about that. I mean, yeah, like it makes sense. Different cuisines from different regions of the world have different fragrances, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, some I like, some I don't like. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think any human could say that, you know.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, some people are not picky at all, and they like all aromas, tastes, etc. I am not that person. That being said, I can still respect the culture of another place. I think. Um, Here's a little, maybe interesting little thought experiment. But so, what do you think are common like Asian stereotypes that manifest? Maybe you see them in media, or you hear word of mouth, or you see with your own two eyes. What do you think?
Common Asian stereotypes. I'll start with
And
the
I mean,
one.
they can be positive or negative. Um, just like you don't have to. I don't know. I mean, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Hmm. Okay, I'll start with one and we can bounce back and forth. I guess one
Sounds
for
good.
me is like obviously the whole like math stereotype. So I have a I have a lot of Asian American students in my class and they always like to joke with me. They're like, "Oh, do you do you have a math degree too?" And I'm like, "If you ever ask me about math, I will make sure that you fail. I will make sure that you do not pass whatever math it is because I cannot do anything aside from basic algebra."
Do they ask it jokingly, or are they actually completely serious?
Oh my God, they're 100% joking. And the
Okay, okay.
extent to which, like, we're comfortable, and I'm sorry, I'll bring up another stereotype about Asian women not being able to drive. One of my students called me over in the middle of an independent project, and he was like, I'm going to show you this clip from The Office where Michael Scott is making fun of how Asian women can't drive. This was a white kid, and he knew I wouldn't take it personal, and he was right. It was really funny.
Cool. I mean, yeah, good for you. That's funny. That's funny. I think the unfortunate reality nowadays is most people have lost their sense of humor, their ability to laugh at themselves. You know. So I mean, props to you for for not getting offended and up in arms about that. Because I mean, oh yeah, The Office is full of gems.
Oh,
Admittedly, I used to kind of hate on The Office, but I
oh, you're
the
gonna
more I
get
watch it, I'm like,
canceled.
you know what? I can't even lie. This is hilarious. This is funny.
There
Um,
you go.
but okay, okay,
How
yeah,
about
yeah.
you?
So like you said, math and Asian women not being able to drive or not being able to drive well. So building upon those, I think I just want to ask, what do you think about those stereotypes? Do you think there's validity to them? Why do they exist? Is it nonsense? Is it?
I, well, you see, the issue for me, at
I guess
least,
it's a loaded question. Sorry.
well, I was gonna say, like, it is kind of true that, like, yes, math is, like, very rational and logical, and I guess that goes to this whole idea that, like, Asian people are very rational and logical,
I have a
right?
rebuttal.
You have a rebuttal. Let's hear it.
Well, I have an opinion. My opinion is, I think, yeah. So a stereotype that I associate with Asian people, Asian Americans, is STEM. So obviously math falls into that. STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. Um, to me, it's what our parents are forcing on us. Um, Generally, Asian Americans, we're immigrants. We came to the United States from Asia, likely to pursue a better life. What does that mean? A better life. Perhaps that means more financial stability. Maybe that just means a better quality of life. Maybe your ancestors or you yourself were living in poverty back in Asia and you wanted just better living conditions for yourself. In order to reach that, how do you do that? Well, history has shown, and I mean, if you just live life, you know, education is important. Um, Getting a college degree and finding a career field that can provide for you financially is important if your goal is to better your life, to better your living conditions. So I think that that pressure is put upon the youth, the Asian kids from the parents, because generally, I guess STEM and math, if you excel in that and if you study hard, do well, then you'll find a good job, whatever that means. That's where I think the stereotype comes from. I don't know. I guess Asians are stereotyped as more calculated and rational. I don't know. Like maybe it's true. Well, maybe there's correlation. Maybe there's causation. I don't know. It's like, do you kind of get what I'm saying?
Yes, and I was actually going to ask if you have ever been perceived that way before, as like very calculating or rational.
Me, I will say no. Um, it's because I'm kind of a I guess I'm the anti-stereotype, or like, I'm kind of a goofball. I'm kind of just a happy-go-lucky, like, I try to be funny. I try to be charismatic, and I'm not saying that Asians can't be funny and charismatic. I'm just saying like, I feel blessed. I feel lucky. Like, I just be myself. Don't get me wrong. Like, I think it's dope being calculated and rational. I think those are good skills to have, but that is not how I would describe myself the majority of the time. What about you?
Oh, what, being described that way?
Yeah.
Um, Actually, I've definitely been described that way, and I had no idea that I came off that way until like someone told me in like some like presentation feedback. I think in college actually once. They said, you come across as like really intense and very like you don't care about your subject. And I said, I was really excited to present. I think I was just nervous and maybe not smiling as much.
I
But I
see.
found that to be very odd because I I had like no idea that I came off that way. No, I to be fair, I didn't ask her if I was like, did my face come off as intense? Like what about it made it come off as intense? But I've definitely been told like, oh, you seem really serious and very
Interesting.
very blunt.
Now that you say it, I can actually see it myself. I think you seem pretty serious. Like, or you're well spoken. Like you're just intelligent, rational, straightforward, good communicator. Um, yeah, I would say that. Just a personality observation. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, yeah. So I guess going back to listing more stereotypes. Stereotypes. I think of filial piety. I don't know if
Mm.
are you familiar with that phrase?
Mhm.
I guess someone listening might not be familiar, but filial piety is basically the emphasis on prioritizing your family's well-being, specifically your mother and your father, your grandparents, providing for them, and having a close connection. I mean, we've talked about this before, I think.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
I've, and yeah, I guess I can give a unique perspective given my biracial background. And obviously, you have white friends, you have Asian friends too, and I have white friends, I have Asian friends too. What I see with my own two eyes is that sense of filial piety is so much more prevalent among Asian Americans than white Americans. And I think that's good and bad. Like, there's pros and cons. It's just a cultural difference. It's not anything that's like completely black and white. Like, oh, this is good, this is bad.
Mhm.
Um, but it's something I've noticed with my own two eyes, and even between my own parents, kind of differing ideologies, which I guess I've never told you before. But as I've gotten older, and now I'm a young adult myself, and I guess I know a little more, and I see interactions from the perspective. I see interactions with my parents and my extended family. I see them from the perspective that I'm an adult now. Just like my mom and dad disagree on certain things, like interacting with their own parents.
Like
And
their
yeah,
responsibility to interact with their parents, or your responsibility as their children?
I guess both.
Oh.
Both. Given that my mom, so unfortunately her mother passed away a while back, but she still is very close with her father, and she
Mhm.
tries to have a good relationship, and that means like seeing each other fairly regularly. But my dad, um, he's not the same. Like he doesn't feel as intense an obligation. And of course, I should specify, my dad is white, my mom is Taiwanese. So it's kind of enforcing the stereotype.
Mhm.
Um, yeah,
You're right. Like, well, and we have talked about this before. This idea that like what works for one person doesn't work for another, and vice versa.
right.
But for me personally, it's not that I am judgmental per se, but I don't understand it. Like, I don't. When someone tells me, like,
You don't understand the Caucasian perspective, or
yes, I guess
go
you
ahead.
would say. Well, and I'm sure like some like viewers out there are probably like, "Hey, I'm white and I really care about my family." But I
Right, 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 right. It just, I think it just manifests in different ways. But I apologize for cutting you off. Please keep
mm-mm,
going.
not at all. Like, I just don't understand. And this isn't actually, I should clarify that I have seen this with some of my Asian friends too. Like, when they tell me, like, oh, like, I've had people tell me, like, oh, I hate my mom. And I'm like in a teenager way or in like a, because, like, because everyone kind of feels like, can you please not point out to me that I'm breaking out? Like, I'd really appreciate it if you don't. Like, that's like the teenage way of like, I hate my mom. And then there are people who are like, I detest my mother. As an individual, I detest her. And I'm like, whoa, I don't, I don't know how I feel about that because, like,
That
on,
is, that's so funny to me that you're pointing that out. Sorry, please finish, because I have a lot to say, actually.
okay, okay, I want to hear because my first reaction to that is like, first of all, this is not the kind of shit talking where I can like shit talk with you about your boyfriend. This is like, this is trash talking your mom, man. Like, I can't
Yeah.
do that. I can't,
I
I
can't
can't.
cross that line. I can't
Oh
go into that
no.
realm.
Exactly. And I'm like, I
Yeah.
would never trash talk my mom like that. Not only because she would beat my ass into the next year, but also like, I don't hate my mom. I love her. I
Mm,
can't even say
mm.
that as a joke.
This is okay. This is so fascinating to me
Okay,
because
go
I
ahead.
think there are lots of implications from this, in my opinion. Um, I don't know if you ever saw those memes back in the day, but it would be like it'd be about like a white kid and a black kid hanging out, and it's obviously like some hypothetical situation, and it was a meme. It was like the white kid says to his black friend, he's like, "Oh, dude, my mom is like she's really bothering me right now, or pissing me off, or whatever." And the black kid's like, "Oh yeah, like so what? What should we do about it?" And then the white kid's like, "We should kill her." And it's like of course it's
I
hyperbole, of course
remember
it's a
this.
joke, but it's also kind of like, oh wait, that's kind of not a joke. But yeah, so this is where I'm conflicted because don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for my parents. I think I mean, my parents have done so much for me. Like, without them, I'm nothing. That being said, not everyone has good parents.
This is true.
And
This is
everyone
true.
needs to recognize that. I feel like, I guess in Asian culture, I guess it's a must. You must love and respect your parents. And if you don't, you are not fulfilling your duty as a child. And in theory, that is good because your parents make so many sacrifices for you. That being said, I'm sure you've heard anecdotes. I've heard anecdotes. Thank goodness I haven't lived through them, but some people have abusive parents. Some people have irresponsible, hateful, just bad parents. And that's where the line. It's kind of hard to differentiate because it's like, yeah, mom, I love you. You've done a lot for me. You've made sacrifices. You've given me this life I live, but you also kind of make my life hellish, and you're unfair to me, and you are not giving me the freedoms that I deserve as a human being, and you're hurting me. So that being like, so it's like, what do you do? Is it okay to trash talk your mom? Like, oh, I hate her. I don't know. I can't answer that question for other people, but it is important to recognize that different people have different family dynamics. You know.
That's
Um,
true. I guess I'm speaking from like the idealistic angle of like I think our family is relatively happy and we love each other. But I think there's also like a level of like a lack of um I don't know how to say it. I don't want to say dedication, but like value because I think if that ever did happen and our relationship did sour with my family, I would really mourn it. Like I'd be really torn up about it for a really long time. But there's a certain I don't know, maybe it's like a defense thing, maybe it's like you don't want to talk about it for a while. Like a kind of like, well, I didn't like them anyway. Kind of dismissive attitude. And that makes me pretty sad. Just
I think you might be onto something there. Yeah, I
I
think
mean,
you
I
might be
don't know
onto.
exactly where I'm going, but
No, I see what you're saying. It's kind of hard to articulate, but I get it. And I think there is some truth to that. That being said, it's not always the case,
that's true.
but it's kind of like a cop out.
No, it's also realistic. To each their own, right?
Yeah. Cool. Um, so from there, switching gears a little bit, um, going more into your family's background, and we're gonna talk about, I guess, racism. I guess a little bit like racism aimed towards Asian Americans. So I know, but people viewing might not know. Your family owned a liquor store, right?
Yes, for a long time. We've
Right.
pretty much owned one for, I think, as long as I've been alive.
Hmm. Awesome. So obviously, owning a liquor store, you're gonna have lots of people coming in and different interactions with, I guess, all types of people. So I know, obviously, because you've told me, but during that time that your family owned the liquor store, can you tell me about any racist incidents you witnessed? Racist incidents you witnessed? Maybe it was towards you or towards your family.
Yeah, I mean, none of them really ever escalated to the point of like violent action necessarily, but my dad, to be clear, he came here when he was pretty young, so he has like almost no trace of accent at all. My mom came here when she was much older, middle to late 20s, so she has a pretty significant accent, and admittedly, it's pretty thick.
Hmm.
My dad, when he speaks, he gets the usual like, "Oh, you speak English really good," and he says really well, and smiles. Um,
Oh, that's funny. That's actually really funny. Wow,
so
that's
my
clever.
yeah, so my dad, he gets it, but he just takes it as a joke, kind of brushes it off. No big
Yeah.
deal to him.
May I interject?
Yes,
What do you think of people making comments like that?
I think it's funny because I'm like, yeah, I speak English better than you do.
Okay, I
I
see
mean,
you.
I studied it as a degree, sir. Like,
All the power to you. All the power to you, ma'am.
hmm
Um, do you do you think some people would get offended by that?
what, me saying that?
No, not you saying that, but say someone came up to them and them, they being Asian, someone said to them, "Wow, your English is really good." Do you think that's offensive?
I don't think it's offensive. I think it does. I think if someone came out of the blue and said that to me, I would just sort of be like, thanks, and move along because because frankly speaking, I'm like, yeah, I'm American, man.
Yeah.
I grew up here. That's
Right.
correct.
Right.
Uh,
Right. Right.
so to me, it wouldn't feel offensive. It would just feel like someone coming up to you and like patting your shoulder and being like, "Oh, you're really buff," and I'm like, "Okay." But I've certainly had friends who take it pretty, like, they do take it as kind of like, oh, you speak English pretty well. And then they put in the parenthesis of for an Asian person. And they do
Mm,
get kind of caught up in
mm,
that.
mm.
Uh, have you kind of seen anything similar to that?
No. Fortunately, I've been very fortunate. I've never really witnessed any racism firsthand. But that being said, if someone said something like that to me, like I don't think it's offensive at all.
Wait,
I think people get
you've never gotten that comment before? Like, no one has ever said to you, like, oh, you speak English pretty well?
no. I've never gotten that.
Interesting. Okay.
I've never gotten that.
Intriguing.
Yeah. So I think people get offended way too easily. Like I like what you have to say. It's not offensive at all. It's ignorant in my opinion. Like if someone did say that to me, they're like, "Wow, you speak English really well." I'm like, I mean, I was born here in America.
Exactly.
English is the only language I know. Um, and anyone can speak English. So is it really that surprising? Or like that's my philosophy. That's my outlook.
There you go.
Yeah.
I I am inclined to agree. So I guess like I don't tend to take it as an offensive
Yeah.
statement. Doesn't feel
Yeah.
like it.
Good for you. I agree with you. I think that's a very mature outlook.
We were talking about before this.
I'm not too sure. I lost my
English.
train of thought.
Oh, liquor store, my dad. And then my
Yes.
mom?
Yes.
Yes. My mom certainly has an accent, and in a liquor store, people are cranky, and my mom is nice but has an attitude when people start having an attitude with her. And I definitely, when I worked with my family in the store for a while, I definitely heard comments like, like, don't you speak English? Like, what's wrong with you? That kind of thing. I think more often during the pandemic, like, go back to your own country, at which point we would all be like, we're here. Um,
We're not going anywhere.
yeah, well,
We
and
we live here. This is our country.
exactly. And to be honest, I think it does help that we are very like confident in the fact that we feel very comfortable here. So to be honest, we didn't even take it as like we have to be defensive. We just took it as you're kind of being an asshole. Can you leave our store, please? And that was kind of the end of the conversation a lot of the time.
Good,
So
good. Yeah. Interesting. Well, I mean, yeah, it's sad to hear stories like that. I'm glad it's. I mean, of course, that's bad, but I've heard some horror stories, like some worse horror stories. Not necessarily from people I know, but I guess like in the news and stuff. But yeah, obviously, like racism is still a thing. Personally, I don't think it's a huge issue in America for Asian Americans anymore. I don't think it's a huge issue. It's still a thing. I don't know. Do you agree with that or?
um so I have like kind of a situation to present to you, and then I kind of want to hear what you think about it. Kind of relevant to the whole like racism thing.
Mm-hmm.
This actually happened today. To give some
Yeah.
context to this, one of my assistant principals is, I don't know if she's Chinese American. She's Chinese, but she speaks with an Australian accent, a very distinctive one.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, I am Korean American. My face
Mm-hmm.
shows that I am Korean. And I ran into her today and she was crying. And I was like, oh, are you okay? And she was a little uncomfortable. And then she explained that she had just gotten out of a parent meeting in which the father is white and the mother is Korean but does not speak English very well. And the father was the only one there, And he was explaining the situation to her as, listen, this is the way my wife wants it to be, the Korean woman. You know, it's just a Korean thing. You just have to let it go. And he kept reiterating this to her over and over. And she became very upset. And the interesting thing to me was she couldn't even explain why. She couldn't explain exactly what about it was upsetting, but she felt upset somehow at the end of it.
Interesting.
And I think it was a combination of things. She described it as, it's bad to hear. What she said was, it's bad to hear, but it's worse coming from someone who's not Asian. Like that kind of thing. And I am a relatively young teacher, so I have no room in which to grill an assistant principal. That is not my place. So I just sort of listened to her, and then she, kind of ended the conversation. What do you think? Like, what do you make of that situation? I honestly came out of it feeling pretty confused and also kind of thrown off by the whole thing.
That's exactly how I feel. And I don't want to insult your storytelling skills or anything, but I'm kind of like, I don't know what this means. So there was a parent teacher conference or parent assistant principal conference, and so the mother, the Korean mother, was not present.
Mm-mm.
But the Caucasian father was speaking with the Chinese Australian assistant principal, and he said something like kind of racially insensitive, or he was just like, "Oh, she wants it this way because it's the Korean way."
Yes, he said something about, like, that's how Korean people are. Something
Do
along
you
those
know?
lines.
Do you know what the topic was?
She did not disclose that to me. She just mentioned it was something regarding the students' grades, and I'm assuming, like, she was dissatisfied or they were dissatisfied with the students' grades, and he kept pressing the issue.
Interesting. Well, I guess it's kind of a cop-out answer, but I think I'd have to have more info to form a more concrete opinion. But that being said, it sounds like what he said just seems a little insensitive at worst. Like, it doesn't sound like anything blatantly over the top, heinous, racist, but it sounds like just kind of like racially insensitive, which is not good, of course. But
Right. I don't know how to explain it exactly. And to give some background, I'm a teacher at a school that's relatively like diverse. It's actually pretty diverse. Like both the student population and the staff population. It just like kind of surprised me that she disclosed that, because I do get that feeling sometimes when like another teacher expresses surprise that I'm the English teacher or anything along those lines. It's like a
does that
subtle
happen?
thing. Oh yeah, all the time.
Is it because your age? Is it because your ethnicity?
I
Both?
think, well, because they assume I'm a math teacher. They're like, "Aren't you the new math teacher?" And I'm like, "No,
Oh
I've
no!
never, I've never been good at math." But thank you for trying. Good job, nice job.
That's funny. That's funny.
It is pretty funny, and I actually got that at my previous school. I got that when I was a student, and people would ask me like, "Oh, what do you study? Do you study engineering?" And I was like, "No, I cannot do engineering, ever." Like it's a subtle thing.
I'm with you there. No engineering for me.
Mm-mm. I said if you wanna keep your machines and your technical things working in working order, you will not hire me as an engineer ever. Thank you. Thank you. But I did find it kind of interesting that like it bothered her so much that she was crying. I was like, "Are you okay? What's happening right now?"
So from her perspective, she saw it as racism.
I don't even know if she would call it racism. She was just like, it bothered me, like it upset me.
But she couldn't articulate why.
No, and like
Hmm.
it could be, you're right. Maybe we need more information. Maybe she had a rough day. But I did find it really strange that that was the thing that she latched onto as the thing that bothered her.
Interesting.
I guess
Maybe he was being demeaning or disrespectful. I don't know.
could be.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I thought that was a really odd incident. I'd also only spoken to this assistant principal about 2 times before, so I was like, we're having a deep conversation today.
Gotcha.
It's nice to meet you.
Well, it's a shame that she was crying, but I hope everything is all good. Hopefully, justice
She
Sort of,
looked.
I don't
She
know
went.
what that means, but
She went right on her way. In any case, that was kind of an unusual incident in the workplace that I saw today. Did you want to bring up anything else about like family or like social settings? I can't remember if you wanted to discuss that.
um, not particular. I mean, I can. I guess my biracial background. I'm bringing it up again. Like, you can see me. Everyone can see me.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is, I am half white, half Asian, but I look more Asian, in my opinion. I've never had someone say, "Oh, you look full white," but I have had people say, "Oh, I thought you were full Asian," when I like explain my ethnicity. So, I mean, I don't know. Like, I live nowadays. I live in a very predominantly white area, more white than anywhere else I've lived before. I live in Florida. I live in West Florida, um, and I mean, luckily, no one's no one's ever pulled any crazy stuff on me. I'm not inside people's minds. For all I know, people could be having racist thoughts left and right in their minds. And truthfully, that's kind of okay in my opinion. Like you can't control people's thoughts. It would not be good to live in a world where your thoughts could be controlled and I guess subliminally influenced or whatever. That being said, that that's not me condoning racism. I think racism stems from ignorance, and the way to combat it is just learning and developing empathy and curiosity and kindness, compassion. Um, but yeah, I mean that's what I can say. What about you and your? I mean, did you grow up in a primarily white area or other Koreans, other Asians? What was the deal?
I definitely grew up in a predominantly, I think, white and Asian area. So, actually, what I was gonna ask you is like, I think there's always like kind of a feeling of like either being left out or being noticed, which like maybe this is like a super Korean thing to kind of notice, but it's this idea of like, oh, I notice when people are looking at me and they're not looking at me like, oh, there's like a small child over there. They're looking at me like, that's interesting. Like, I've definitely felt
Mm,
that before. Like, the first time I visited like rural Georgia,
mm-hmm.
I had someone ask me um, how to say something in Chinese, and I was like, oh, I am like adamantly, like, clearly not Chinese,
No.
like,
You
strongly not.
wait. You're adamantly not Chinese. Is that what you said?
Well, I'm like clearly not. I think
Ignorant people don't know that. Ignorant people see Asian. Asian equals Chinese. That's how ignorant people think. That's how
I
they think.
guess that's true. That well, no, maybe they haven't seen a lot of Asian people before. But to clarify, like she asked this after she first asked me how to say it in Chinese, and I said, "Oh, I'm not Chinese," and she said, "But how do you say it?" And I said, I don't think you heard what
Oh.
I said. I don't think you heard the important part of that statement, which is I am not Chinese. We're just gonna," and I just moved along. I was like, I'm not Chinese. I don't speak Chinese. We're just going to move along from this conversation. We're just going to keep going.
That is so crazy.
I did not go to college in that area. I was like, ooh, this isn't going to work.
Mm, I got you.
Um, yeah, so I think I was lucky to grow up in a place where there were a lot of Asian people, a lot of Korean people.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I feel very comfortable. Like
No,
Korean, Korean American. It all kind of feels like very natural to me.
good for you. I mean, that's human nature. We're comforted by familiarity, by people who are similar to us. That's just the way it is. I what I want for America is I want everyone to feel comfortable, regardless of our differences. I think most rational people would agree. That being said, if you're black and you prefer hanging out with black people, totally cool. If you're Japanese, you prefer hanging out with Japanese people, totally cool. Hispanic, prefer hanging out with Hispanics, totally cool. But everyone should feel comfortable, you know, and that's how I think, at least.
Right, and
Um,
if nothing else, you shouldn't let it influence your actions against others. Like that's
no,
not like you said, you're free to think what you want,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe not mistreating others.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You can think what you want. That's everyone has biases, prejudices, etc. But you got to be courteous. You got to be respectful. You got to be within the law.
Exactly.
That's what I think.
I agree.
Yeah. You got any closing remarks?
Uh, I think we'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well,
Sounds good.
thank you.
Thanks for having